Think you can spot a narcissist? Well, you may want to think again because their most powerful tools are hidden in plain sight, in the words they use every day. And today we're exposing 10 common phrases that reveal their narcissistic manipulation. And for better or worse, by the end of this video, you'll never hear these words the same again. So welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina and I'm a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. If you think you've had a relationship with a narcissist, I've got a free checklist that can help you see how your own experiences stack up with the phases of narcissistic abuse. And you'll find a link for that in the description box below. So now let's get into the first words that reveal a narcissist. But before we do, let's acknowledge that we're looking for patterns of saying these words and phrases and not one isolated incident. Also, context is important, and that's why we'll be looking at examples here today too. So the first phrase is, "I'm sorry you feel that way." And this non-apology, what I like to call a faux apology, shifts the blame back onto you, making it seem like your feelings are the problem instead of their behavior. So imagine a narcissist whipping out one of their trademark, brutally hurtful comments. Let's say something like, you wouldn't look half bad if you just put in a little effort. So naturally, you would call them out because ouch. And so you share your feelings about their entire attitude towards you. And you're maybe even hoping for a momentary lapse in their typical callousness. But that's not what comes next when you're dealing with a narcissist, especially when you're dealing with a narcissist who doesn't actively want or need anything from you. So you're not going to catch them saying anything along the lines of, "You're right, and I'm sorry." Instead, the best you might hope for is something like, "I'm sorry you feel that way." And it almost sounds like they care about your feelings. But if that were true, if they actually cared, they might have offered a sincere apology instead. But if you're really hoping for an apology, you might convince yourself that this is genuine. Like, this is just them. This is their version of an apology. And also, hey, let's be real, you might have even used this phrase yourself in the past. But there is a difference, and I want to talk about that right now. When you use this phrase, you're hopefully not using it to dodge accountability because it can mean different things, and it's not always an apology, even though sometimes it's passed off as one. So when the narcissist uses this phrase in lieu of an apology, it's absolutely not about owning up to their actions. It's more like, "I sympathize with how you feel," which might sound okay until you realize that no one wants sympathy from someone who just said something inappropriate. Your feelings are hurt because of their actions or their words. And so why would you want their sympathy? But sometimes when we say this, we genuinely mean that we're offering sympathy. So if you hear that someone has passed away, you might say, "I'm sorry for your loss." You're not taking responsibility for the loss, but you're offering sympathy for someone who's hurting. And that's an appropriate time to use sorry in that context. But when you're dealing with a narcissist and you hear, "I'm sorry you feel that way," of course, and many times you're going to dispute it. You're not just going to accept that at face value, especially when you've heard it a million times before and you know it means nothing. So you might have a thing or two to say about that apology. And when things escalate, you're probably going to hear something like the next phrase, which is, "You're too sensitive." And we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to cover it at length, but I couldn't leave this one out because no list of manipulative phrases is complete without it. Being told you're too sensitive or that you're overreacting is a classic yet powerful way that a narcissist will invalidate your feelings and make you doubt your own reactions. Now, of course, this is a common phrase, so it's important to point out that not everyone who says this is a narcissist or out to manipulate you. But I will say that it is always a red flag. This phrase, even if the person who's saying it is well-intentioned, the phrase itself is always problematic because no one has the right to dictate how much or how little you should feel. And when there's a pattern of someone saying this, it's not just a red flag, it's a blazing warning sign. And more than that, it is gaslighting. So let's look at another classic gaslighting phrase you'll almost always hear a narcissist say, and that is, "I never said that." Now, this one's a simple phrase that's designed to make you question your memory and your sense of reality. And listen, if it happens once, it's probably no big deal. Maybe you did mishear or misremember, or maybe the person genuinely forgot they said something. But when this phrase is used to manipulate, it becomes a pattern, and an extremely convenient one at that. So let's look at an example. Imagine you and your partner had a conversation where they promised to help with household chores more often. A week later, when you bring it up, they respond with, I never said that. And of course, you're feeling confused and you're probably thinking something along the lines of, well, that's very convenient of you to forget that. But when this happens a lot in a relationship, you end up doubting yourself more often than you should. And so you might end up wondering if you imagined the entire conversation or if, as they're accusing you, you're misrepresenting what they said. Really, ultimately, it just gets you to doubt yourself. And this can be used for things big and small. But with a narcissist, big and small, it's consistent. These are patterns that you're going to see over time. They're going to get you doubting yourself in one way or another. And this is one big way that they can do it. But in each conversation, when this phrase comes up, it's not really so much about memory because, again, it's very convenient. So it seems kind of like this person has developed selective amnesia. They're always forgetting the things that don't serve them to remember. And narcissists will use this phrase to dodge accountability or to cover something up, but it's always designed to work in their favor. So those are the patterns that you can look for. And if they can't worm their way out of something with flat out denial, you'll hear something along the lines of the next phrase, you made me do it. Another version of that is, this is all your fault. And this phrase just blatantly shifts the blame onto you, making you look or feel responsible for their bad behavior. And this one really sucks because if you have a tendency to take too much responsibility for your own actions and maybe take the blame for things that aren't really yours, you could believe a narcissist when they tell you it's your fault they're abusive. And to be clear, if someone is abusive, it is their fault they're abusive and no one else's. Each one of us only has control over our own actions. So if we behave badly, there's no one else to blame. And this is a good time to talk about reactive abuse, which is when someone highly narcissistic, might I add, is abusing you specifically to get a reaction. It's messed up on so many levels, and you should never stay around someone who's doing that. But you still do need to own your actions and your reactions. When you're the one who's in control, you're the one who has responsibility. So let's move on to the next phrase, and I'm gonna guess this one has been used against you at least once. And that phrase is, everyone else agrees with me. So of course, no list of manipulative phrases could be complete without some good old triangulation. When you're being triangulated, the manipulative person is trying to make it seem like you're in the minority. And it's almost always, if not always, to their benefit and to your detriment. So this could be used in an argument where they just want to be right, or it could be outright abuse and they're making it seem like everyone else is signing off on it. So here's an example. Let's say you're in a fight and you're not accepting the old, I never said that, or you're overreacting. At this point, the narcissist needs to bring in the heavy artillery. They need to make you, one, feel small, and two, make it seem like everyone else thinks you're not good enough in some way. So they might say something like, I told you to shut your mouth because you talk too much. And you know what? I'm not the only one who says this. Everyone thinks so. So these things are often fabricated, and they're usually just things that the narcissist says to put you down and to make it seem like they have some authority in doing so. So if you hear something like this, do not take it at face value. And now let's look at another one of the narcissist's favorite phrases, and that is, you're lucky I'm with you. And another variation of that, you're lucky you have me, or no one else would put up with you. These phrases are designed to chip away at your self-esteem and create a sense of dependency. And listen, when someone says this occasionally, or maybe even in a joking way, it might not feel like a big deal. But when it becomes a recurring theme, these words reveal a much darker truth. And that truth is the narcissist truly believes that they're better than you. And this tactic is all about making you feel like there's an imbalance in the relationship. With any phrase like this, any variation of it, the narcissist is positioning themselves as superior, as if they're doing you a favor by being with you. And the sad part is, if you have an unworthiness wound, as so many of us do, you're eventually going to believe them on some level. And when I talk about stuff like this, people on the outside who've never experienced this type of abuse, they think we're all just sitting here with rose-colored glasses on, buying every nonsense story the narcissist is peddling. But that's almost never the case, is it? Most of the time, we know they're problematic. The problem that comes in is that these phrases make us feel like we're lumped in with all their madness, and we start to think that we're just as damaged as they are. And hey, let's be real, maybe in these relationships we are a little damaged, but we're not damaging. And that's the difference. You're showing up flaws and all and have the best intentions towards other people. In fact, you might be likely to put their needs above your own, even. So, possibly damaged, temporarily at least, but not damaging. We're not damaging other people. And at the very least, certainly not as damaging as a narcissist who is not taking accountability for their behavior. Because that narcissist is going to lack some level of emotional empathy, and they're not going to care if they hurt you to make themselves feel better. And they may hurt you a lot just to make themselves feel a little bit better. And that's kind of okay with most narcissists. So phrases like this, "you're lucky I put up with you," serve to boost the narcissist's ego, undermine your confidence, and create a sense of obligation to stay in the relationship. After all, if you're so lucky to have them, how could you ever think of leaving or even just standing up for yourself? Because if you were to do that, then they might leave you. And if you truly believe that you're lucky to have this person, you might think twice about standing up for yourself. But none of that is true. It's all lies and it's all illusion. It's all manipulation. But if they ever sense you're starting to see through their manipulation, they might escalate to something like the next phrase, which is, "I didn't mean it like that. You're twisting my words." Or another variation, "That was taken out of context." So these phrases are classic deflection, and they're designed to make you doubt your own perception and interpretation of what happened. And the reason why "that was taken out of context" is one of my favorites because it's usually said when absolutely no context could possibly explain what they said in a positive light. So, for example, the precise words that came out of their mouth were, "You're hideously ugly." And their defense is that you took that out of context. Yeah, sure, they said it, but you just took that one sentence out of the whole conversation. But what context could really explain that one away? Can you think of one? I guess maybe if you're dressing up as Beetlejuice for Halloween or something, it would make sense in that context. But for the most part, there's no context where that is a phrase that you should really say to another human being. And so, unfortunately, here's why phrases like this work even in the most ridiculous of scenarios. Because the conversation shifts from their inappropriate words to your alleged misunderstanding of their words. And the narcissist relies heavily on this one for a few reasons. One, it allows them to avoid taking responsibility for their hurtful comments, of course. And two, it allows them to paint themselves as the victim, because after all, you're using their words against them, even if you're just literally repeating word for word what they said. And three, if you're in a relationship like this long enough, it might even make you doubt your own ability to understand simple communication. And if you insist on holding them accountable, it might escalate to something like, "You always do this, you're so sensitive, you twist everything I say into something negative." Now, not only are you dealing with the original hurtful comment, but you're also being labeled as overly sensitive and prone to misunderstanding. And by this point, the conversation has strayed so far from its original purpose that you're not even sure how to steer it back. So this next phrase is similar to "I never said this," but it actually takes things to another level. And this phrase is, "You're just imagining things." And this one is meant to completely invalidate your perceptions and experiences. And the narcissist uses this one either when they've been caught red-handed or when they're just trying to dismiss your feelings. So if they were caught red-handed, it might look a little something like this. You say, "Hey, I saw you crossing the street holding on to someone's hand. Who was that?" Their response, "You're just imagining things." You say, "But I saw your face and I know you saw me, and you're literally wearing the same outfit. How could you even say I'm imagining this?" And that outright, that blatant denial, it's downright maddening. But for the narcissist, it's kind of like a game. It's not just about avoiding accountability, it's about reshaping reality to fit their narrative. And the goal here is to create so much doubt that you either start to doubt yourself or you just get so exhausted by the nonsense that you stop asking questions. And either way, It's a win for the narcissist. And of course, this phrase, just like all the other ones we're talking about here today, it's not just limited to romantic partners, and it's certainly not limited to situations where the narcissist is cheating. This can happen with financial discrepancies, excluding you from plans, or any behavior they want to hide. And if you continue challenging their story, they might escalate to something like the next phrase: why can't you just let it go? And this, it's really a seemingly innocent question, and it's something that you might have found yourself saying to them many times. But there is a difference. For the narcissist, this is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of manipulation. It's designed to shut down discussions, invalidate your feelings, and avoid all accountability in one fell swoop. It's like the verbal equivalent of a dismissive wave of the hand. So, when you're talking to someone and they just kind of do this, like as if whatever you're saying, whatever your concerns are, they're nothing more than just annoying flies they can swat away. And yes, this phrase, again, it might be something that you found yourself saying again and again. Anyone can get to the point where they say, why can't you just let it go? Especially if someone's nagging at you over an issue that was actually resolved. And so this one can actually be tricky to spot, but if you know, you know. What this looks like with a narcissist is this. So let's say they forgot your birthday. Naturally, you're a little upset. And so you tell them how you feel, to which they say something like, I'm sorry you feel that way, you're just too sensitive, or it's actually all your fault for some reason. So when you open your mouth to tell them that they're deflecting and they should maybe think about apologizing, they hit you with, why can't you just let it go? Why are we still talking about this? Maybe because you've only been discussing it for about 2 minutes and nothing's been resolved. So you didn't even get a clear answer as to why, never mind an apology. And again, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the conversation swings so far away from its original purpose, and you're suddenly on the defensive, feeling like you're needy because this matters to you, or like you're just a nag who can't let things go. But the implication here is clear. You're the problem for caring. They're not the problem for their actions. So this phrase paints you as unreasonable or overly sensitive for having concerns, and it absolves them from the need to address or, oh my goodness, change their behavior. And it also creates an instant sense of fatigue around the issue. Even if you've only brought it up for the first time 2 minutes ago, you're already exhausted. And all of this discourages you from bringing it up again, and that's very convenient for the narcissist. But the problem is, the more you hear this phrase, the more likely you are to internalize it. So you might start to question yourself. Am I making too big a deal of this? Should I just let it go? And this self-doubt, it's exactly what they're aiming for. And it works so well, unfortunately, because it leverages the natural pressure we feel to be easygoing and forgiving. And so another phrase that reveals a narcissist's manipulative nature is, you're the only one who has a problem with this. So when a narcissist says this often, and it's always said to excuse their bad behavior, it's very clear that they're manipulating you. So imagine the narcissist consistently shows up late to important events, leaving you waiting alone and maybe embarrassed because you're always making excuses for them. So when you see them and you express your natural frustration, they might counter with, you know what? You're the only one who has the problem with this. Everyone else understands I'm busy. Or this phrase sometimes can also come in with a even bigger helping of triangulation. So let's say, for example, the narcissist likes to eat dinner in front of the television, and you want them to sit with you at the table. So they might say something like, no one else has ever had a problem with me doing this. And if you're in a romantic relationship, suddenly it feels like all their exes are sitting in the room with you, staring you down. And you also kind of feel like if you do make an issue of it, your partner, this narcissistic person, will value you less than he or she values their exes. Again, if this happens one time, you might not think much of it because it's very subtle. But when this happens consistently over time, it can really have an impact on your self-esteem. So this phrase, no one else has ever had a problem with this, it does a few things for the narcissist. So first, it isolates you, making you feel like you're alone in your concerns. It can also normalize potentially problematic behavior. And that's just depending on the situation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that sitting down to eat in front of the television is necessarily problematic behavior on its own. But there are times when this phrase is used to normalize things that really shouldn't be normalized. And finally, this phrase paints you as the outlier, the problem in the situation. It subtly implies that if you were more like everyone else, you wouldn't be upset. It's a form of social pressure that leverages your desire to fit in against your own valid feelings and observations. And the worst part is that it's not something that you can easily prove or disprove. I mean, after all, who is this everyone else they're talking about? And are you actually going to start polling all these people? I can tell you that if you did pick up that phone and start calling them, you might just find out that you were right all along and everyone else has a problem with the behavior. But you probably won't make that call for fear of hearing the next phrase, which is "you're petty." And this one here is another one of my favorites. So when the pettiest of petty calls you petty, the irony is almost too much to bear, isn't it? But the reason why this one is so problematic is a lot like what's behind the phrase, "you're the only one who has a problem with this." It's societal pressure. So some people will proudly wear the title petty while others try to avoid that label at all costs. But either way, when someone calls you petty for simply standing up for yourself, it leaves a mark. So let's say, for example, you have to split expenses with a narcissist. When it's your turn to reimburse them, they're over there pulling out receipts for 36 cents because, after all, why should they have to cover you for 18 cents? And listen, even though that does seem a little petty, they're not wrong. If that's the agreement, then it is what it is. But here's the thing. When the shoe's on the other foot and you're asking them 2 or 3 times to finally chip in for their share of a $50 bill, it's all, "Oh wow, you're really hurting for that $25, aren't you? That seems petty to me after all I do for you." And yes, that is another common phrase narcissists use against you because they're always overestimating their contribution. But let's just save that "after all I do for you" for another round. And if you have any other phrases narcissists use to manipulate you, be sure to share them in the comments so we can capture them all. Hearing these phrases, yeah, it may bring up some really frustrating memories, but it's also helpful to know that you're not alone in this madness. So many other people have experienced it too. And if you want to know how to turn the tables, you are definitely going to want to watch the video that's about to pop up on the screen where I share 10 phrases narcissists hate to hear when they're hearing it from you. And yes, these are typically the ones that hold them accountable. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button before you go, and I'll see you next time.